And as we can see, because they are completely different kinds of covenants, it's impossible to combine them. Hello and welcome to the Beginning of Wisdom. I'm Andrew Schumacher. This is The Cross and the Torah, a series devoted to answering the arguments and claims of the Hebrew roots and Torah observance movements. Today we are going to be looking at something that is going to cause us to do something a little different than I've done in this series. Thus far I've been able to tackle pretty much any topic in the series in a single video. This one's going to take more than one. It's just too much information to handle all at once, and so it will be split up. What we're going to be talking about are the covenants of God, and while it won't be completely exhaustive, I want to establish something today that the Torah observance movements tend to deny without really dealing with the evidence of the scriptures on this topic. When addressing the errors of these movements, one of the first things that you may notice is a tendency among them to be confused about the covenants of God. But this confusion will often be presented as confident assurance. Now, when it comes to the covenants themselves, it can be difficult to get to the heart of the matter because when people approach the covenants from one camp or another, they tend to view everything through their own framework and so often don't see the weaknesses of their own positions. Now, within Christianity, there are several different views of the covenants. I'm not going to get into all of those in detail, but maybe another video. What I'm going to do today is dispel the notion found in the Hebrew roots and Torah observance movements that everything can pretty much be blended together into one covenant. Now, there's a sense in which Presbyterians do this as well, though to a lesser extent. So if that's your position and you find that what I say disagrees with you on anything, well, you're not wrong, but I'm not specifically addressing your position in this video series. What I'm talking about is the fact that the Hebrew roots movement and Torah observance tend to blend the covenants.
Now think about this for just a moment. The word Gentile means out of covenant. So if you think you're a Gentile Christian, that means you're an out-of-covenant Christian. I wouldn't brag about that.
Now, the blending of the covenants done by those in these movements is really an attempt, of course, to make all of the commandments found in the Mosaic covenant binding in the New Covenant in the same way that they were binding before Christ. So one thing that's very important to make clear here is that this video series is going to prove that really we are dealing with different covenants that are different kinds of covenants. I'm not going to be digging deep in this series on the law itself or what constitutes law in the Mosaic covenant versus the New Covenant. Right now, what I'm going to do is establish that these really are separate and distinct covenants. Once we've done that, then at a future point, I can refer back to this while establishing the different types of law that we find in these two covenants. So in this series, we're primarily going to be dealing with three covenants: the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and the New Covenant. And so rather than just going with these man-made traditions of the Torah observance teachers, what we're going to do is look at the scriptures and show what they say about these covenants. We're going to go with what the Spirit inspired, not what these men have taught. So in this first part of the series, we're going to deal specifically with the Old Testament, and we're going to look at the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant and note the differences that we find there. And these are not just surface level differences. They are very, very important differences. So let's start with the Abrahamic covenant. God's covenant with Abraham is revealed in three encounters: Genesis 12, 15, and 17. Genesis 12 gives us the initial call of Abram, in which God makes promises about things related to the covenant, but the covenant is not yet mentioned by name or actually established. Genesis 12, 1 through 3 says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, Go forth from your country, and from your relatives, and from your father's house, to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Here God promises Abram that he will bless him, and that through him all the families of the earth will be blessed. None of this is conditioned on Abram's obedience or anything like that. These are simple promises given to him unbidden. Next, we see the actual covenant established in chapter 15. Genesis 15, 4 through 18 reads, Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. And he took him outside and said, Now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be. Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. He said, O Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it? So he said to him, Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, and a 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then he brought all these to him, and cut them in two, and laid each half opposite the other. But he did not cut the birds. The birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. God said to Abram, Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Ammonite is not yet complete. It came about when the sun had set, and it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. This was a common practice in the ancient Near East with these kinds of covenants, known as a suzerain vassal treaty, where a greater king would make a treaty with the lesser king who served him. And the two would walk between the pieces, and they would exchange promises about what they would do, but the greater king would issue forth the commands about what was to be done by the lesser king, and the lesser king would promise to keep those commands. And the carcasses, the dead animals that are separated, are there as a reminder that it is calling forth this type of result if the vassal king should not obey. What you'll notice that's different about this case from the standard suzerain vassal treaty is that Abram does not walk through the pieces. The smoking oven and flaming torch pass through the pieces, representing God, and God gives all the promises. This is really unusual. It's a departure from the sort of standard way that this treaty was struck, but it is important to note that at this point, with the sacrifices, this is where the treaty, and in this case, the Abrahamic covenant, is established. And so, while there may be other things that God certainly says to Abraham, commands Abraham, and even further, even refers to as covenant with Abraham, this is the moment in which the Abrahamic covenant, the one that all the promises that the New Testament talks about, is struck. And you'll notice that just like in the previous citation, there's nothing expected of Abraham. He is simply given these promises by God. Now finally, we have further promises that come in chapter 17. Chapter 17, 1 through 8 reads, Now when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come forth from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. I will give to you and your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Notice once again, these promises to make a multitude of nations out of Abraham and give his descendants the land come with no strings attached. God never says, if you do this and that and the other thing, then I will keep these promises. He just simply makes the promises. Now, in the verses following this, God institutes circumcision and refers to it as a sign of a covenant between him and his offspring, and certainly that those who refuse to be circumcised will be cut off from their people. But none of that is given as a condition upon which this covenant we found in chapter 15, and here reiterated and promised in chapter 17, will be fulfilled. God is making these promises, and he never says, I will do this only if you keep certain commands or certain regulations. So the nature of the Abrahamic covenant is one of promise, and this is something believers and scholars have noted, always, that, and even in the New Testament, we have sections that we will talk about later where Abraham is referred to as receiving promise, and Moses is, there's commands in the law, and these two things are distinguished from one another. So let's go ahead and now move into looking at the Mosaic covenant. Now, I'm not going to, again, look at all the specific laws we find in the Mosaic covenant in this video. What I want to do is, again, look at the covenantal language that comes with the Mosaic covenant and with all those laws. And, we see some similarities and some big differences. One similarity, like with Abram, we have God presenting the covenant to the people, just as God presented it to Abram in chapter 12 before actually establishing it in chapter 15 of Genesis. We have a similar thing going on in Exodus. In Exodus 19, we have the presentation of the covenant before it is actually established. Exodus 19, 3-6 reads, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and all the sons of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. Then we see in chapters 20 through 23, the terms of the covenant are presented, beginning with the Ten Commandments. That's followed by other laws. Finally, in Exodus 24, we have the establishment of this covenant itself. Exodus 24, 1-8. Then he said to Moses, Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and you shall worship at a distance. Moses alone, however, shall come near to the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with them. Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words which the Lord has spoken we will do. Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent young men of the sons of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. So Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, and said, Behold, the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So just as with Abram, there's the sacrifice of animals, this time the sprinkling of blood, and this ratifies the covenant along with the promises of the people to obey the terms of the covenant. Now, they do disobey shortly after this with the golden calf, and God says that he will make a covenant in Exodus 34:10 with the people after that incident, and tells Moses to write down the words he has made a covenant in accordance with. Now, Hebrew roots teachers make a lot of this as if this is a new covenant, but just with the same terms as the previous covenant. This is as if the first covenant in Exodus 20 is now broken and gone, and so a new covenant is being struck. Now, this doesn't affect much in terms of the commandments. Everything is still the same, but notice the sacrifices. There are no new sacrifices mentioned to ratify this new covenant in Exodus 34. Moreover, the author of Hebrews clearly considers the covenant made in Exodus 24 to be binding up until his day, since he refers to the sprinkling of the blood that we saw in that chapter. That's in Hebrews 9:18 through 22. Now, getting back on track, we see this covenant reinforced in Deuteronomy after the wandering. In the first few chapters of Deuteronomy, they're commanded to remember the covenant made at Sinai. And then we have the famous blessings and curses found in Deuteronomy 28. Reading a portion of those, Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 6, and 15 through 19. Now it shall be, if you diligently obey the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments, which I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. All these blessings will come upon you and overtake you if you obey the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the offspring of your body, and the produce of your ground, and the offspring of your beasts, and the increase of your herd, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. But it shall come about, if you do not obey the Lord your God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes with which I charge you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the country. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall be the offspring of your body, and the produce of your ground, the increase of your herd, and the young of your flock. Cursed shall you be when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. So this is just a portion of what is found in Deuteronomy 28. And notice that the blessings and curses are all physical and all related specifically to obedience of the Mosaic covenant, of the commands given to Moses. This is clearly not the same kind of covenant that we saw with Abraham, but we do see it clearly connected to the Mosaic covenant. It's appended to what was given at Sinai. The next chapter right after these blessings and curses starts with this, Deuteronomy 29:1. These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the sons of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he had made with them at Horeb. And so we see that this is a summation of the giving of the Mosaic covenant. Deuteronomy 30:15 through 20 says, See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, and death and adversity. And in that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and that the Lord your God may bless you in the land where you are entering to possess it. But if your heart turns away, and you will not obey, but are drawn away, and worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You will not prolong your days in the land where you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess it. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. So choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants, by loving the Lord your God, by obeying his voice, and by holding fast to him. For this is your life and the length of your days, that you may live in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. So the Abrahamic and Mosaic covenants are not just separated by time and place, by many centuries, But there are also two very different kinds of covenants. The Abrahamic covenant is a covenant of promise, a promise of blessing, in which the sole person responsible for keeping that covenant is God. Meanwhile, the Mosaic covenant is a covenant of obedience for the people of Israel and contains curses and blessings, because curses if they disobey, blessings if they do not. And as we can see, because they are completely different kinds of covenants, it's impossible to combine them. Because to add the Mosaic covenant to the Abrahamic covenant would be to turn a covenant of unconditional promise into a covenant of conditional promises and utterly overthrow what was done in the Abrahamic covenant. You can't change the nature of a covenant centuries after it was ratified by God, as it was in Genesis 15. And of course, Scripture doesn't do this. Now, as we will see in the next part, the distinguishing of these covenants becomes very important when it speaks of the new covenant. We'll go on to that next.